Hello, this is Catherine from Accelerated Reader, reading books for you. Today I will be reading Seymour and the Lifeboats, written by Mark Horsburgh, illustrated by Caroline Appleyard. Before I begin reading, I would like to give a big thanks to the author for sending me this book to read on my channel. In the description below, I've included links where you may find and purchase this book. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Seymour and the Lifeboats. Stay away, seagulls! You are not going to dive bomb me today, thought Seymour. The holiday season was well underway, which meant that Seymour and Tooting Ted met up most days at Sandy Bay Beach. There had only been a few stormy days when the wind had blown an uncomfortable force 5, stopping him working. This meant Seymour remained in Smuggler's Creek, as he would struggle to provide a comfortable journey for his passengers. Although he could travel in bigger waves, the rocking and rolling motion would probably make a number of his passengers feel sick. Not to mention Scapa the cat, too, who, on rough days, retreated under Skipper Salt's footrest and stayed there in disgust. Scapa liked best to bask on nice calm days in the warm sunshine at the bottom of the glass windscreen. Have you ever suffered from seasickness, young salts? It is pretty horrible, and you think you are going to die. The only cure is to get back to land, or alternatively, you can get special medication from the chemist, which you take before you even think about getting on a boat. Some people even suggest eating ginger biscuits or jam sandwiches. On this day, though, the sea conditions were calm and Seymour knew it would be busy on the estuary. More people than ever seemed to be staying in Walcombe and enjoyed all it had to offer. Calm, warm weather encouraged people to go on the water. Max, the mackerel fishing boat, was fully booked up for the next few days. Many holidaymakers, who perhaps had never fished before, enjoyed the thrill of catching mackerel, proudly bringing them back from their trips in clear plastic bags. It was good advertising, as they had Max's name on them. You could spot Max the mackerel fishing boat from a distance, as he had a row of fishing rods placed all around the deck. He was about the same size as Seymour, but had an open deck so people could stand while they were fishing. Max was a hard worker, but some might say a little careless. He would take risks by running extra fishing trips when he should have returned to Walcombe for a break. Ignoring the speeding rolls, he would power out of the estuary to the open sea as fast as he could without getting caught. His only engine required a lot of attention, and he drank a lot more oil than was good for him. Perhaps his engine should have been replaced a long time ago, as it often smoked and leaked oil, especially at high speed. Rufus, the Walcombe lifeboat, and Max had sometimes clashed, as Rufus felt Max was unsafe and could get in trouble through his own carelessness. Rufus, the lifeboat, had served the town faithfully for many years. He was a magnificent example of a Tamar-class all-weather lifeboat. His orange and blue livery with red pinstripe made him undoubtedly a vessel of the RNLI, Royal National Lifeboat Institute. He was unsinkable. Rufus was brave, knowledgeable, and was well respected by all the boats based in Walcombe. Rufus, however, had one flaw. He liked to work alone, and he really wasn't a team player. On this particular day, Rufus was not concerned about Max and seemed to be preoccupied with events closer to the lifeboat house. Monthly spring tides meant that there was not enough water for Rufus to be alongside the lifeboat pontoon, so he had been moved to a deep water mooring in the middle of the harbor. "What are tides, I hear you, young salts, ask? Well, this isn't easy to explain, but seawater doesn't stay at the same height as water in a swimming pool. It changes height, gradually getting higher and then gradually getting lower. This happens twice every 24 hours. It is to do with forces from the moon and the sun pulling on the water. You and I are held down by the force of gravity, but the sea is also pulled down and up." As Max rushed past Rufus, perhaps a little too fast, he was expecting Rufus to tell him off about his smoking exhaust and the oil trail leaking from his stern, but nothing. Rufus didn't even notice him. Rufus was staring at the doors of the lifeboat house. He could see there were lots of people gathered around the lifeboat station, and music was bellowing from the town's band. He thought he could make out a glinting gold chain. Could he see the Walcombe town mayor? Was that a white ribbon in front of the lifeboat house's folding doors? What was going on? Thought Rufus. It looked like another fundraising occasion, and usually he was center stage, in the spotlight. Thinking of which, he'd often been featured on the BBC TV Spotlight News program himself for his rescue work. Normally, feet large and small would explore all over his decks and cabins, and news reporters would be asking questions. Why wasn't he there? Suddenly, Rufus heard a loud drum roll, which set the seagulls squawking. The folding door of the lifeboat station opened, and shooting out down the old slipway, landing straight in the water, was another blue and orange vessel. It was crewed by 3 fully kitted out young lifeboat volunteers. Clapping and cheering echoed around the town as the other, much smaller lifeboat darted effortlessly at speed between the gathering boats. The new lifeboat impressed everyone with its maneuverability. The new lifeboat was an Atlantic Class 85. She was about 7 meters long and looked magnificent. Rufus couldn't contain his emotions as Seymour cruised by, heading to the town quay and all the revelry. He noticed Rufus tugging angrily at his mooring line. "Your rope giving you trouble, Rufus?" Seymour asked politely, but Rufus just ignored him. "Isn't it great about the new inshore lifeboat? I heard the coxswain and my skipper talking about it last week," continued Seymour, hoping to get some kind of response. Rufus took a moment to respond, as if needing to choose his words very carefully. "What a pleasant surprise!" he replied insincerely. "You sound rather upset," quizzed Seymour gently. "Did you know about it, Rufus?" Rufus and Seymour had known each other for some years, and there was great trust and respect between them. Rufus felt he could share his true thoughts with his friend without them being repeated. He explained that he knew nothing about the new inshore boat and was quite angry. Was he to be replaced and sent away? Rufus always felt he had served the Walcombe community well and had saved many lives. "No, Rufus, it's not like that at all. The town still needs you. Remember, last summer we had trouble with windsurfers getting washed on the rocks and capsized dinghies in shallow water?" "Yes, I do. I did try my best to get close to them, but I was in danger of damaging my hull. As it was, I scraped paint off my bottom," replied Rufus anxiously. Seymour went on to explain that the coxswain felt Walcombe estuary was becoming busier and busier each summer. The inshore lifeboat from nearby Cutlass Cove had been called out too many times, so Walcombe had applied to the RNLI for its very own inshore boat. Seymour was sorry that Rufus knew nothing about it, but surely it was good news, and Rufus would now have a buddy, a kindred spirit, like Seymour had with Tooting Ted, the sea tractor. "I work alone," Rufus said solemnly, and bid farewell to Seymour. Saddened and perplexed, Seymour said goodbye and tootled towards the Blue Strands pontoon, where he could see a queue of expectant passengers waiting. Distracted by the town's brass band playing another catchy tune, Seymour didn't notice that the new inshore lifeboat had drawn up alongside. "Hello there! You must be Seymour, the Sandy Bay Ferry. I am Izzy, the inshore lifeboat, but you can probably tell that already," she gushed. "They call me the shallow water lifesaver, and I am so excited to be here. What a wonderful town!" Izzy's excitement reminded Seymour of Scapa as a kitten. Skipper Salt had bought Scapa for his son Jack when they first arrived in Walcombe. The kitten could not stop moving and meowing. Izzy kept spinning around Seymour, desperate to make friends. Seymour didn't know which way to look. "I can't wait to meet Rufus. He looks magnificent out there in the harbor. I want to learn so much from him. I hear he is very brave and well respected amongst you all." Seymour didn't know what to say. He felt sorry for Izzy, as he knew Rufus didn't feel the same way. Thankfully, Skipper Salt had successfully tied him up and passengers were getting on board. Realizing she was interrupting Seymour's work, Izzy dashed off and said she hoped they could meet up later. Meanwhile, out at sea, Max, the mackerel fishing boat, was getting himself into a bit of a pickle. He didn't have his usual type of customers. Experienced anglers had hired him, who didn't want to catch mackerel, but more challenging fish like sea bass. Bass were tricky fish to find and also hook. Max, thinking of bonus money, tips for a good catch, worked his way closer and closer to the rocks where he knew the bass lived. But Max felt nervous. He had never fished here, but knew there were several rocky outcrops that could slash a hole through his hole if he wasn't careful. "I can see birds diving for little white bait fish. There must be sea bass nearby chasing them," exclaimed a rather portly, red-faced angler. "We need to get in closer amongst those fish so I can cast my fishing line and reach them," he commanded. Out at sea, a line of clouds was approaching, and with them a fierce summer squall started turning the wave-tops white. White horses started covering the sea. A squall, young salts, is a rain cloud with lots of wind underneath it. Max was now required to chug very slowly, as close as he could to the jagged rocks. As the waves grew bigger, Max found it much harder to steer, and his engine started to cough and smoke badly. He didn't seem to have the power to pull away from the rocks. The wind kept blowing him closer and closer. Suddenly, Max lost all power. His engines had stopped, and he was drifting into certain danger. Around the same time, Seymour and Tooting Ted were busy transferring passengers from one to another. They were happily chatting when Ted noticed something strange close to the cliffs. "Here, look, Seymour! There's a boat in trouble close to Snake Hole Cliffs. Goodness, the waves out there are growing bigger, and he's heading straight onto those rocks." Seymour, taking a closer look, suddenly realized it was Max the mackerel fishing boat. Skipper Salt's radio crackled into life. "Mayday! Mayday! Mayday! This is Fishing Boat Max. Our engine has stopped dead. We need help or we will be—" The voice cut off abruptly. In Walcombe, all was quiet. Everyone was going about their normal business. The boatyard people were busy repairing boats, and the restaurant people were cooking and serving food to their customers. Suddenly, some of these local people started reaching into their pockets, not to find keys or pay for shopping, but to pay attention to their special bleepers. Quickly stopping their daily tasks, they clicked the sound off on their bleepers, made their excuses to customers or bosses, and slipped into the Walcombe streets. Some ran, some jumped on motorbikes, and others jumped into cars as, with a common purpose, they headed for the lifeboat house. The lifeboat house doors were open, and the volunteers raced to dress in their waterproofs and line up as the coxswain quickly chose a crew from amongst them. Within minutes, Izzy inshore and her chosen crew had raced up the estuary, expertly dodging the pleasure craft, sailing dinghies, and surfers that dotted the water. Seymour, Ted, and everyone stopped in their tracks to watch the rescue mission unfolding before them. Izzy quickly reached Max and threw a tow line. The skipper fastened it securely and gave the signal to start pulling. Although this was Izzy's first actual rescue, she had practiced this maneuver many times in training, so she felt confident she could save everyone. At full throttle, she pulled with all her might. Her two propellers churned the water furiously. The noise was so loud that walkers on the nearby cliffs were covering their ears. Izzy kept pulling and pulling, but Max was still perilously trapped in the rocks. Izzy could feel her engines overheating. The high temperature alarm shrilled. She had no choice but to stop. Panic set in. Izzy didn't know what to do, and to make matters worse, the waves were now crashing over Max. The once confident anglers were now hanging onto Max's rails for dear life. Then a calm and purposeful voice came over the radio. "Walcombe inshore lifeboat. This is Walcombe lifeboat Rufus. Good decision, Izzy. Save your engines. We will be with you shortly. Over." Izzy and Max turned their eyes to see Rufus. From experience, Rufus knew to take a position where he could assess the rescue situation properly. He could see that Max was wedged between two rocks, preventing Izzy from towing him free. He could also feel the waves were much stronger in this part of the bay, and Max would sink if he wasn't freed soon. Rufus calmly instructed Izzy to transfer the tow rope to him. He would try and pull Max free. Next, the passengers needed rescuing from Max's deck, and that was a job only Izzy inshore could do. She was designed to deal with just this sort of eventuality, shallow water work. By now, Izzy's engines had cooled sufficiently to power through the waves and remain steady alongside Max, while the frightened anglers scrambled off. Once Izzy, with the survivors aboard, was at a safe distance away from the dangerous rocks, Rufus moved into position. He could see that Max was petrified. "It's okay, Max. We will have you free in no time. Trust me," Rufus called reassuringly. "The tide is rising all the time. I'll wait for a particularly big wave, and then I'll yank you free." I hope so, Rufus. I'm scared. I can feel freezing cold water running over my decks and running into my insides. I'm getting heavier by the minute, Max sobbed. Like an experienced surfer, Rufus waited for a big wave to roll in before he made his move. With his huge engines roaring, the tow rope tightened, and almost immediately Max shot free. He popped out from his rocky trap like a champagne cork from a bottle. At once, Max felt better. No longer clamped awkwardly by the rocks, he could feel himself getting lighter, the water running through his scuppers back into the sea. Watchers from the cliff path and nearby boats could be heard cheering loudly and waving madly like celebrating football fans. The newly formed RNLI two-boat life-saving team had done something really amazing, saved 5 lives and hopefully Max too. In no time at all, Rufus towed Max onwards to the greater safety of Walcombe Harbor. Usually, Rufus looked forward to the attention he would be given on his return, but on this occasion, Rufus decided to forego the adulation for a while. He wanted to spare Max's blushes, so instead of parading Max for all to see on the lifeboat quay, he towed him around the corner to the privacy of the Walcombe boatyard. Once alongside the boatyard quay, men put slings under Max, and the powerful crane lifted him onto the harbor wall. As he was lifted out, Max heard Rufus saying, "You'll be okay, Max. It's a funny feeling, but better than being wedged in a rock. You are in safe hands. Mr. Colkit and Mr. Socket are expert boat repairers." Max felt wooden chocks and wedges brace him upright on the tarmac. A ladder was placed onto his gunwale so the man could climb aboard. They headed straight down into the wet cabin below. Very soon they came out shaking their heads. "I'm afraid that engine is worn out. A new cylinder head and bearings at the very least. Maybe even a new engine," Mr. Socket said sadly. "Keep your bow up, Max. You'll soon be back in the water," Rufus called encouragingly as he steamed off back to Lifeboat Quay. Rufus could not help but feel pleased. He was still needed. Izzy inshore had shown that she wasn't strong enough on her own. However, Izzy had proved herself useful in a tricky situation, braving the shallow water to save the anglers and transport the essential tow rope. "I must tell Izzy how well she did today," thought Rufus. Rufus's job was still his. The folks of Walcombe still needed him, and yes, he would have to share some tasks in future with Izzy, but he could get to know his teammate better as time went on, and they would be friends. As a team, they would be stronger and able to save more lives. Besides, he had never really liked the rather bad-mannered inshore rescue boat from Cutlass Cove. By now, Seymour was safely back in his night mooring, settling down to hopefully an undisturbed chat with Peter Potter, the lobster boat. Peter was a very gentle, steady sort of boat, who Seymour also counted as a good friend. He too had seen the rescue while lifting lobster pots near Snakehole Bay. "How is poor old Max?" he asked sensitively. "I felt so sorry for him out there today. I could hear those stupid anglers barking out orders. Where is he now?" "He's safe in the Walcombe boatyard, but he is pretty damaged. He will need a new engine and will be off the water for some time." Suddenly, a familiar commotion disturbed their quiet chat. Since the start of the holiday season, Oscar Whiskers, the seal, had taken it upon himself to hang around Seymour at the end of the day. Like a cat climbing over furniture, Oscar would leap on his deck, flipping around constantly looking for fish. Seymour kept telling him he was not a fishing boat, but a ferry. Nevertheless, Oscar didn't listen. "Hiya! What you talking about?" he hissed. "Would you mind not leaping all over my deck? Skipper Salt gets annoyed as he has to jet wash your fishy smell off every morning." Seymour said politely. "Sorry, Seymour," Oscar replied sheepishly. He wasn't a naughty seal, just bad-mannered and rather messy. And he did enjoy his evening chats with Seymour. "Will you tell me what went on at sea with Max today?" he quizzed. "Did the rocks pinch his bottom badly?" "As a matter of fact, they did pinch and gave him some very nasty scratches too," frowned Seymour. "Oh, ouch! Oh, ouch!" sympathized Oscar aloud. "Where is he now?" "In the boatyard," Seymour and Peter replied, both yawning. Seymour and Peter knew the only way to get peace and quiet was to say good night and wish him well. "Don't let the crabs bite," Peter called after him as Oscar silently disappeared off on his own underwater adventures. Seymour's head nodded, and that was it for another day as the sun set behind the hills beyond the bay. The end. Thank you for listening. Don't forget to like and subscribe. In the description below, I've included links where you may find and purchase this book.